The Oscars are just a week away, and I've got my thoughts on every single movie nominated right now. Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell, and this is a very special video where I look at every single movie that is nominated for an Academy Award, which the final countdown is on. It is 1 week from today. So what we're gonna do today is to go over every single nominee, both feature and short films, documentary, you name it. I think this is the first year that I've seen every single movie nominated in every single category. I'm not gonna do a full length review, obviously, on each of these, because then this video would be 8 hours long, but I'm going to mention briefly my thoughts on all of them. Some of them have full-length reviews elsewhere here on the channel that you can check out, and I'll try to note that where I can. One thing I won't be doing in this video is to pick who I think will win and should win. That video is going to come out later this week as we get closer to the Oscars, so be on the lookout for that. So let's get the party started with the Best Picture nominees, and the movie that is the frontrunner to win Best Picture and has the most Academy Award nominations this year, which is Oppenheimer. It's nominated in a slew of categories. I've talked about it here on the channel several times, a regular review, a spoiler review. It was my favorite movie of 2023, and there's not really that much more left for me to say about it. Other than that, I think it is an incredible film. I think it's Christopher Nolan's best movie. Obviously, I think it was the best movie made in 2023. I've seen it 3 times now. It's held up for me every single time. It's going to be one of those movies I think that I'm going to be able to just sit down and watch whenever I want to, whether it's been 5 years or 5 months since I've seen it. It's rare that the Best Picture frontrunner is the movie that I also liked the most the previous year, but Oppenheimer happens to be one of those years.
How remote? Chances are near zero. Near zero. What do you want from theory alone?
American Fiction is a movie I haven't talked about here on the channel a lot. It picked up nominations for Best Picture, Actor, Supporting Actor, Adapted Screenplay, and Original Score. I was actually glad that I didn't know what the movie was about. I hadn't seen a trailer or read a synopsis when I first watched it, because a lot of the joy that I had watching this movie was in it unfolding in ways that I didn't expect.
Can I ask what you were in for?
I don't like to talk about that. You feel me?
Was it murder?
You said that, not me.
I think that Jeffrey Wright absolutely deserves that nomination for Best Actor. Sterling K. Brown surprised me as a Best Supporting Actor nominee, not because I didn't think that he was good in the movie. I did think that he was. I just thought that there were some other performances that would have stood out more. And it does have that sharp, satirical edge to it. It has a voice, a very clear, distinct voice. And the message of the movie and what it's trying to say isn't a rote repetition of something that you've seen in many, many movies before. I think it challenges convention in a lot of ways. So I think that American Fiction is a great inclusion amongst these nominees because it is so singular in what it has to say.
I see what you're doing.
Good, because it's not subtle. I mean, how's that book so different than some of the other garbage they put out?
That's not the point.
Well, it's my point.
Next up is Anatomy of a Fall, which was one of my favorite movies, and I talked about it in my top 10 list for 2023. It is a mystery, but you understand the more that you watch it that it's not necessarily about the whodunit of it all. It's about understanding who these characters are. Sandra Hüller's great in the movie, and she's a lot of people's upset win to win Best Actress. I think in a different year, maybe she would have been the leading contender, although it's traditionally tough for an actor to win an acting prize for a movie that's largely not in English. Roberto Benigni and a few others have been able to do it. But I think this movie really is a masterclass in storytelling. I love that it got the editing nomination because it deserves it. It could very well walk away with the original Screenplay Academy Award. There's so much to like in this movie if you're patient and just willing to invest in these characters as this tragic story of what happened unfolds. Barbie also had a lot of nominations, including Best Picture, of course, but also Best Supporting Actress and Supporting Actor. And it is the expected winner of the Best Original Song Academy Award. I think it might also generate the most talked about moment of the night because it appears that Ryan Gosling has been confirmed to perform I'm Just Ken on the Oscar telecast. I'm actually looking forward to that. I've talked about it here on the channel a couple times, and I feel like this movie has what I call gladiator syndrome, which is that I liked Barbie, but I didn't love it as much as some other people did, and so people come back at me and say, why did you hate Barbie? I didn't actually hate Barbie. I thought that it was a good movie. I thought it was great in some ways. I thought the performances were great. I thought that Greta Gerwig's direction was actually really good. I would have nominated it in the directing category and maybe not necessarily in the screenplay category where it is nominated. And as I've said from the beginning, I understand why this was such a powerful film for so many people. I really, really do. Even if it didn't speak to me necessarily in the same way, I acknowledge its importance and the power of its message for so many that watched it. I think it's important when we're looking at movies generally to understand why movies mean so much to people, even if they don't mean the same thing to you. And I've seen this with reactions to so many movies and shows, and it's only increasing, that if someone doesn't share your reaction, then you're called a liar. Or you didn't like it and I did, so you're a terrible person or whatever. They don't want to throw a label at you. I think we need to get away from all of that. I think that it's important to look at movies and understand that they're a subjective experience. Barbie is a movie that I liked. It's a movie that a lot of other people loved. I think it should be included with the Best Picture nominees because it was such an important part of the film picture in 2023, and we'll see if it can surprise and pull any upsets in other categories.
To be honest, when I found out the patriarchy wasn't about horses, I lost interest anyway.
That's okay.
The Holdovers is also nominated for Best Picture. It was one of my 10 favorite movies of last year. It looks like it will definitely capture the Best Supporting Actress award for Da'Vine Joy Randolph. We'll see what happens with Paul Giamatti. Looks like Cillian Murphy has the inside track in Best Actor, but you never know. And you can refer back to my top 10 of 2023 for more thoughts, but I just love that this felt like a throwback movie in that it was a very intimate story about a small group of people. And these characters are so complex and they have so many facets that even though it's set, decades ago, and you may not necessarily be the same age as some of the characters in the movie, you find something in each of them that you connect to. And that really goes back to the essence of movie making. Those are the basics of a good movie. And even though The Holdovers isn't the flashiest movie that's nominated this year, it's still going to be one of my favorites. I haven't revisited it yet, but I'm sure that I will soon. The world is as rich and as deserving of praise as the worlds built by Barbie or Oppenheimer or any of the other bigger films. And I think that it's something that if you haven't seen, you're really going to enjoy.
I can't fail this class.
Oh, don't sell yourself short, Mr. Coates. I truly believe that you can.
I'm supposed to go to Cornell.
Unlikely.
Killers of the Flower Moon racked up a lot of nominations as well. Early on in the cycle, people thought that maybe this was the next Martin Scorsese film to win Best Picture. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. And in my review of the film, I talked about the fact that we have to give our great directors the permission to make films that are good, that you can't expect every movie to rise to the level of greatness, to the level of their best work. And that's still how I feel about Killers of the Flower Moon. I think that there are outstanding pieces of the movie. Lily Gladstone's performance is a standout. It looks like she may very well win the Best Actress Oscar. She's sort of locked in a race with Emma Stone. This may be the last thing I do. But I still think that there's some issues with the storytelling. Movies can be long. Oppenheimer's long. Some of my favorite movies are long, but this one I didn't think needed to be as long as it was. And that really goes to the heart of most of my problems with the film, a movie that I think is good but not great. I think because Robert Downey Jr. is such a frontrunner in the Best Supporting Actor race that people are still overlooking Robert De Niro's performance in this movie. I think it's one of his best performances in decades.
These head rights must go to Molly, not to the mother, not to the sister Rita, not Bill Smith.
Yes, sir.
You got to take back control of your home.
But I'll be interested to see the legacy of Killers of the Flower Moon past this Oscar season. I don't think it's going to be regarded as one of the standouts in Martin Scorsese's filmography, even though it is in many ways a very impressive film. Maestro may very well be shut out of the Academy Awards. It might pick up an award in makeup and hairstyling, but it certainly doesn't look like Bradley Cooper or Carey Mulligan will be walking home with the Oscar or that it's going to win the Best Picture Oscar. It was pretty high up on my list when I looked at my favorite movies of 2023, and I'm going to be curious to revisit that list in 2 or 3 or 5 years because I think that this might slip down it a little bit. That's the thing with making these best of lists. You see so many movies at the end of the year. A lot of times you don't get to sit with all of them. And I don't think that Maestro would fall out of my top 10 at all, but I think I might have rated it 1 or 2 spots higher than it might actually end up. I do stand by the fact that Carey Mulligan's performance in this movie is fantastic.
There I was, blushing, butterflies all a-tremble, and, well, seems I'm attracted to a certain type.
I know that Bradley Cooper has sort of become a meme for this movie, that people thought he was just trying really hard for an Oscar, but I think he's legitimately very good in the film, and I don't think that he made the movie just to win an Academy Award. I see a lot of love for the subject matter behind this movie, so I feel like it's been written off, Maestro has, as just some sort of empty Oscar bait piece of fluff. I don't think that that's fair to the movie, even though it may not be the most compelling movie of the awards season. Past Lives picked up 2 major nominations for Best Picture and Best Original Screenplay. I think it should be nominated in 2 or 3 more categories. It made my top 10 list for 2023. And this one, I think, is one that might move its way up my list over time. I only have really a chance to see most of these movies one time, with the exception of 2 or 3 of the ones that I was able to see this year, the ones that maybe came out earlier in the year. And so Past Lives is one that I'm looking forward to revisiting, because it is very quiet and it could very easily be overlooked. But it is a story that has stuck with me, and there are moments in this film that I keep returning to in my head. Sometimes you see this when a movie first comes out. If it's a smaller scale story, it doesn't necessarily get that immediate recognition. But Past Lives is, again, one of those human stories that, even though it is about 2 specific people from specific cultures under a specific set of circumstances, you can find something in them, I think, to connect to and to understand with when you look at your own life and potential missed opportunities and what your life is and what it could be. There's so many deeper questions beyond just what these 2 people are going through, and I think that many more people in the future are going to find and love this film.
This is my life, and I'm living it with you.
Are you happy with it?
Poor Things is another Oscar juggernaut this year. Either Emma Stone or Lily Gladstone is almost certain to walk home with the Academy Award for Best Actress, and it's nominated in a slew of other categories, including Best Picture, Supporting Actor, Director, Adapted Screenplay, and many more. This movie was in my top 10 of 2023, although Poor Things is a lot more polarizing than I expected. I think because of the subject matter, and I think because a lot of times people will write this movie off because they will hear the premise explained without seeing it for themselves, and by people that sort of jump to conclusions. And I understand that they are walking a very tricky line in this film, but I think that's one of the things about the movie. To me, it is able to walk that line without falling too far over to being in any way offensive or even worse than offensive. And I think that it comes down to Emma Stone's performance and understanding this character and where she is beyond just the premise of the movie.
Bella's so much to discover, and your sad face makes me discover angry feelings for you.
The final Best Picture nominee is The Zone of Interest, which is also nominated in the Directing, International Feature, Adapted Screenplay, and Sound categories. And I think that it's deserving of wins, honestly, in all of those categories, even if it doesn't win all of those Oscars. I think it has such an important message, though, the idea about evil and the fact that there are people in this world that are capable of going about their everyday lives committing atrocities as if nothing's wrong, and they don't see anything wrong, and they don't understand why anybody else sees anything wrong. And it's about grappling with that evil, and I think in a way preventing a world where that sort of thing can happen again, because it is so casual in this film. Everything that's happening is done so matter-of-factly, and I think it is so important to remind people of that, because you can't forget that. You can't forget that this actually happened, and the hope is that it could never happen again, although world history has taught us time and time again that that's sadly likely not going to be the case. The Zone of Interest is not an uplifting film by any means, and it's also not the biggest, loudest, flashiest movie, which I think is why it's not necessarily going to win Best Picture or Best Director, although I think it's almost a cinch to win the Best International Feature category, since Anatomy of a Fall was not eligible in that category. But it is one of the best movies of the year, and one of those that I look forward to seeing again, but not anytime soon. It's so well made, but I think that's like a once-a-decade watch for me.
Wenn ich wollte, würde mein Mann deine Asche sofort über den Feldern von Babice verstreuen.
Let's move on to a couple of films that weren't nominated for Best Picture, but do have performances that are nominated in the acting categories. One of them is Rustin. Coleman Domingo is nominated for Best Actor for his role as Bayard Rustin, one of the key figures in organizing the March on Washington, the place where Martin Luther King delivered his I Have a Dream speech. And Rustin is one of those movies that is what could be called, I think, an actor showcase, which is that I don't think the screenplay necessarily is anything special. I think the movie is fairly standard biopic graphic stuff, but the character is so compelling, and Coleman Domingo is so great in it that it is really almost constructed as a showcase for his talent. In the hands of a lesser actor, I think that Rustin could have been very forgettable, not because the man, Bayard Rustin, was in any way forgettable, but just because of the way that it's constructed. But Coleman Domingo, almost through sheer force of will, makes you pay attention to this movie, and I think that's what defines a really solid performance.
On the day that I was born black, I was also born a homosexual. They either believe in freedom and justice for all, or they do not.
Nyad has a couple of nominations in the acting categories. Annette Bening is nominated for Best Actress for portraying Diana Nyad, while Jodie Foster is nominated for Best Supporting Actress as her longtime friend and trainer.
The mind. This is what I was missing when I was younger. I've got it now.
The mind does not swim 100 miles across the ocean, right? The body does.
And this is yet another movie that is uplifting, but without the big name stars in it, I think largely would have gone unnoticed. I think that it's also tinged with some of the controversy around Diana Nyad and her accomplishments, and many people casting doubt onto the legitimacy of those accomplishments. It is definitely a great story, and watching the movie, I found it to be a compelling story, and one of those things that takes so many twists and turns, it almost seems stranger than fiction. Like, it's hard to believe. Not necessarily, giving my opinion on whether it's true or whether it's not true, but this is yet another case of attracting top-tier talent to a movie that otherwise wouldn't necessarily have stood out of the pack. Daniel Brooks is the only nomination The Color Purple got at the Academy Awards this year. This is another film that people thought maybe several months ago could be in contention for Best Picture and a lot of other awards, and yet it has just this one nomination. I think it's unlikely that Brooks will take home the Academy Award, but she is deserving in her role.
I want to thank you, Miss Seeley, for everything you've done for me.
And I did a full review of The Color Purple when it came out. It's a movie that I enjoyed. I thought it had some issues, but really culminated at the end with a very powerful finale. I wish that they had been able to do that throughout the duration of the film. I hope that people don't overlook it because it wasn't this big awards season darling, because I still think it is a worthy retelling of the story. I don't think that it tops the original movie in every way. I think generally the original film tells the story overall better, but I like the musical aspects of this film, and I think that it does some certain things in the finale perhaps a little bit better than the first movie did. So it shouldn't be thrown out just because it didn't get a whole lot of nominations. And again, outside of this current Oscar season, I hope that it's going to sort of make its own reputation when it gets out of the shadow of the Academy Awards. May December picked up an Academy Award nomination for Best Original Screenplay, although, as I said, I think that Charles Melton should have also been nominated for Best Supporting Actor. He really had a lot of heat early on, but didn't quite make that cut. Some people have categorized this movie as a comedy. I don't see it that way. I think it uses the trappings of melodrama to kind of put you on your back foot and make you think that perhaps this is a satire, and then it just sort of punches you in the gut with what it's actually doing. This is what Todd Haynes does as a filmmaker. He sort of plays with how he tells his story and then tells something that's very real and very emotional. The performances in this film are top-notch, and the only reason I can think of that it wasn't more of a breakout is because of the tone of it, and I don't necessarily think that tone is for everybody or that everybody's really going to appreciate what the movie's going for. I thought that it was really good, a bit uneven for me. I didn't always like what they were doing, but honestly, Charles Melton is what made the movie for me more than anything else. He grounds it so much in tragedy and this idea of slowly understanding what your life is, and so if for no other reason, I would recommend checking out May December if you haven't already.
Insecure people are very dangerous, aren't they?
Let's take a look at the nominees for Best International Film. The Zone of Interest we already talked about because it's nominated for Best Picture. Society of the Snow is also nominated for Best International Feature and Best Makeup and Hairstyling. I really, really liked this movie, directed by J.A. Bayona. It's on Netflix right now. It tells the same story as the movie Alive about a plane crash in the Andes and the people that were stuck there for weeks and weeks, but it's so much more visceral than I think the big Hollywood studio production. Not to say that Alive is a bad movie. It is a very harrowing movie, and it's a very dark story. It goes to some very dark places. I think the movie was very tactful about showing the grislier parts of what they had to do to survive. It's a very tricky balancing act, and J.A. Bayona gets it right. If this is on your list to see before the Oscars and you haven't seen it, I would devote some time this next week to checking out Society of the Snow because it is one of the better movies of the year. Io Capitano is nominated for Best International Feature from Italy, but it focuses on two young teenagers from Senegal who are trying to make their way from Senegal into Italy. There's very little actually that takes place in Italy. It's a very weird kind of mix this year with Best International Features. Many of them nominated from a certain country, but set in different countries. This is one of the later movies that I just saw. I think it's a really, really strong film. And actually, I think 4 out of these 5 nominees could very easily have won in a weaker year. And even the 5th nominee, I think, is a strong contender in any other year. This is not an easy watch, and it really does show you how people can exploit other humans who are in difficult situations and just want to make a better life. But it also shows you the very best of human nature along with the worst of human nature. And one of my least favorite things about the Best International Feature category is that these movies are often so hard to find ahead of the Academy Awards ceremony. So if you can't find Io Capitano, but you have the ability to watch it later, it's definitely a recommend for me. Perfect Days is Japan's nominee this year, although it's brought to us by director Wim Wenders, who hails from Germany, and it is basically a slice of life of a toilet cleaner in Tokyo, and we see his days as he goes around to various different toilets, meeting different people. It is sort of the Gene Dealman of the janitorial world, I guess, if that makes any kind of sense. But what it's really about is routine and the idea of thinking that you have your life in order, but then through his interactions with all of these different people, he starts to wonder about that life, and is it really ordered as well as it could be, or is he using this order to mask something else? Perfect Days is not a movie that's going to be for everybody. It is a very slow film. It does sometimes test your patience, but I think it's worth it because part of understanding this man and his life is to understand what he goes through every day, which means that we have to watch what he goes through every day. And Koji Yakusho, who is the lead in this movie, he won the Best Actor prize at the Cannes Film Festival for good reason. Never really seemed to be in contention for the major awards, the Oscars, etc. But it is one of the best lead performances I've seen in a film this year. One of the movies that can also bring you to tears almost in complete silence. There's a sequence in this film where you see basically the whole movie playing out over our lead actor's face that I think is just one of the best moments of the year cinematically. The last nominated film for Best International Feature this year is The Teacher's Lounge from Germany, or Why I Will Never Get a Teaching Degree. It's one of the movies that I would call a verbal suspense thriller in that there's no action necessarily, but the tension just gets cranked up and cranked up and cranked up as the movie goes along. It really starts as a teacher who wants to help solve this mystery of who is stealing things around the school, and it plays with the idea of good intentions and how sometimes when you think you're doing the right thing, it can have consequences that you don't intend, and then people take it and spin it their own way. It's an infuriating watch, it's a frustrating watch, it's a stressful watch. Of the other 4 nominees this year, this is the only one that I really don't see winning even in a weaker year, but at the same time, I think this is a great analysis of human nature, and also in many ways is similar to Anatomy of a Fall in that you understand as the movie goes on that it's not necessarily about the resolution of the mystery that's at the heart of the story, but how the characters revolve around that mystery. Let's look at the movies that are nominated for Best Animated Feature. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is anticipated to win the Academy Award. It was one of my favorite movies of last year. I've talked about it several times here on the channel. This was a great follow-up to the first film. I think that it escalated things in all the right ways. Originally, we were supposed to be getting the sequel very shortly, I think in just a couple months' time. That's been delayed, and probably for good reason, because you don't want people to have to rush in to these things. Whenever the new Spider-Verse film is ready, I'll be excited to see it, and we'll see if Across the Spider-Verse is able to join Toy Story 3 and Toy Story 4 as the only animated sequels to win the Oscar for Best Animated Feature. The Boy and the Heron seems like the only movie that could take the Academy Award away from Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. I did a review of it here on the channel. This is allegedly Hayao Miyazaki's final film as a director, although he's certainly retired and unretired before. And I honestly think that it would have had a better shot of taking this away from Across the Spider-Verse if it was a little bit more straightforward. But it's a very lyrical, at times almost dreamlike film. I saw a lot of reactions underneath my review from people saying that they didn't necessarily respond to that aspect of it, and I'm sure that that's probably the case with some Oscar voters as well. But I still think that it's a beautiful movie. I don't know if it would have my vote for Best Animated Feature Film. I have to sit down and think about that as I make my Oscar picks later this week. But if it were to win, I think that it would be a worthy winner. Elemental is nominated for Best Animated Feature, one of the best comeback stories at the box office last year. We covered it extensively on Charts with Dan. I haven't revisited it yet, but I still stand by my initial thoughts about the movie, which is that I think that it's a fine movie. I think it's good. I don't think that it's one of Pixar's best, but I do think that it's something that people have obviously connected to. And it's popular on streaming, which is great because it's found its audience that way. And it certainly had a great second and third act at the box office. And as far as the animated feature category, I think that it's worthy of being here because I think that the animation itself in this movie is fantastic. It doesn't always come down to plot, etc. I think that Elemental deserves to be here based on the quality of the animated work done. Netflix's Nimona got an Oscar nomination. This is a huge comeback story. At one point, this movie was canceled due to corporate mergers. I thought this was a really cute movie. I didn't see it till several months after it came out. I don't necessarily think that it stood up as one of the most outstanding pieces of animation that I've ever seen, but it has a very distinctive voice and a very distinctive feel, and I think that that's important when you're looking at the best animated works of the year. Nimona definitely had a lot of things to say. I liked its message about being an outcast and finding your place of understanding and fitting in. And I think that it also was a great adventure story. A lot of times adventure is lost when we look at best animated feature nominees because sometimes they can be a little bit more ponderous. But Nimona is kind of a classical animated story mixed with a more modern take on animation. And I think that it works. If you haven't seen Nimona, it's on Netflix. It's a fun watch. It's about an hour and a half long. It's not a huge time investment. Give it a shot. The final nominee was a bit of a surprise. It's a movie called Robot Dreams. It was distributed by Neon here in the United States. And it is a largely dialogue-free movie about a dog. And this is a world where dogs are basically humans. They live in apartments, who buys a robot for company. And when the robot gets stranded on a beach over the winter, it's almost like an Odyssey story of the robot trying to get home and the dog trying to rescue the robot. I thought this was a really, really cute movie. I know that some people might be put off by the fact that there wasn't any dialogue. A lot of it is miming and sort of visual storytelling, but I think that that is what filmmaking is at its core. It's a visual medium, and I thought that this was just a really, really affecting story in many ways of two people who find each other. One of them is a dog and one of them is a robot, but the movie is also about their time apart and how life can take you down roads and places that you didn't expect to go, and it's about so much more than a dog and a robot. You know, I think that some people could look at it as a very simplistic story on that level, but it goes much, much deeper than that. So if you can find Robot Dreams, again, it's not going to be a movie that's for everybody. It might try some people's patience. I was actually wondering about the first half hour whether I was going to be able to get into it, but once it really got into the meat of what it was trying to say, I thought that it was a really, really cute movie, again, with a message. We have lots more Oscar contenders to go over, but before we do, I want to thank the sponsor for this video. This video is brought to you by Rocket Money. Keeping track of your money is as important as ever, but it's also harder than ever. Have you ever seen a charge and said, "What's that?" or forgot to cancel that service that you don't use anymore before they charge you for another year? You can help solve all of those problems with Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills. When I open Rocket Money, it lists all of my recurring fees and subscriptions broken down by category, and if something pops up that it doesn't recognize, the app asks me to put it in the right category so it knows how to track it. Rocket Money doesn't just track your money, they can also help you cancel those unwanted subscriptions, help to negotiate lower prices, and even try to get refunds for services that you don't want anymore. And it's all done with a super easy to use interface. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has helped save its members an average of $720 a year with over $500 million in canceled subscriptions. Stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/Dan. That's rocketmoney.com/Dan. rocketmoney.com/Dan. Let's move on now to some movies that were nominated in the technical categories, and we'll go to one of my favorite movies of last year and one of many other people's not favorite movies of last year, which is The Creator. I've said so much about the film already. I'm not going to continue to defend what I like about the movie. It's nominated for Best Visual Effects and Best Sound. We seem to maybe be entering a golden age of science fiction with the Dune films and with movies like The Creator, which I don't put up there on the level of Dune, but which I put on a pretty high pedestal. And I would be happy to see studios pour money into these big budget sci-fi epics, although The Creator was produced at a very responsible budget. It's hard to make that money back because most big sci-fi movies aren't huge crowd pleasers. But hey, you know what? As long as studios are putting money into them, I'll keep going and enjoying them. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 is also nominated for Best Visual Effects and Best Sound. I think it's interesting that for the Paramount Plus release, they're advertising it as just Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. It remains one of the movies that I'm most confused about as far as its box office performance last year. I thought that it was a really solid entry in the franchise, but it just wasn't necessarily the movie that people wanted to go see, especially as it opened just before Barbenheimer, when all of the box office oxygen in the room got sucked up. You had the Sound of Freedom phenomenon going on at the same time as Mission Impossible was released. There were just so many other factors that were involved, but I still think if you didn't see it, that it is a really solid action movie. It's definitely long, and we've been making this trend towards longer movies, but I think enjoyable. Ridley Scott's Napoleon is nominated in 3 categories for visual effects, costume design, and production design. This is another movie that a lot of people perhaps had marked for more Academy Award nominations prior to release, and it certainly seems like the kind of film that would dominate the Oscars. But I think it's nominated where it needs to be, because I thought that this was a fantastically made film, but I didn't really get behind the whole point of view behind it. Joaquin Phoenix is doing some stuff in this movie that's interesting to see as an actor, but this was just such an odd combination of the top level, A-class really, production design and everything that it's really nominated for, with this very muddled artistic idea of what the movie's going to be. And so Napoleon, for me, I think is going to be one of those films that has all of the pieces of greatness, but just couldn't really put them all together. In a wide open year in the visual effects category, Godzilla Minus One stands as good a chance as any movie of walking home with the Academy Award. It would be an upset because it's up against some high-level competition. I listed Godzilla Minus One at number 10 on my favorite movies of 2023, and I'm looking forward to seeing it again when it's available to watch at home. It is one of those movies that transcends what you would expect in so many different ways. We've seen so many Godzilla movies at this point, and it does do a lot of the same things that the other Godzilla films have done, but I think it also dives so much deeper into the richness of its characters, the richness of Japan's history, and the fact that every Godzilla movie, it seems like, or every generation of Godzilla movies, looks back on Japanese history and the future of Japan through different eyes. And I think as you go back in time and watch these movies from the 50s all the way now through the 2020s and then going ahead, as I'm sure they'll continue to make them, it's almost like a historical record of Japanese culture and Japanese film. And this is going to be a keystone entry when you look at the history of Godzilla films. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 picks up a nomination for Best Visual Effects, the latest MCU film to compete in the category. And if Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 does win the Oscar for Best Visual Effects, it would be the first MCU film to ever win that award. That's right, no Marvel Cinematic Universe film has ever won the Oscar for Best Visual Effects, which I think is pretty astounding considering the high-level VFX that we've seen in some of them, not all of them. I was in the minority with my feelings on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I did think that it was a fitting end for these characters, and you can tell how much James Gunn loves them, and I liked the movie, but I thought that it was excessive in many parts where other people didn't feel that it was excessive, and so I didn't like it as much as most, and that's totally fine. Not everybody has to like the same movies the same ways, but as far as the visual effects go and its nomination here, again, if it were to win the award, I wouldn't be angry. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny picks up a record-extending nomination for John Williams for Best Original Score. I'm torn because I love John Williams. He's one of the most brilliant musical minds of all time, but is this one of his best scores? Was this one of the best scores of the year? I am not really so sure. I think I was maybe in the minority with Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and that I didn't hate the film. I thought that it was good, or pretty good. I think it could have been better, but certainly not the abomination that many people wrote it off as being. However, I don't think it really did anything to get rid of the idea, and I'm one of these people, that the franchise's best days were firmly back in the 1980s with those original 3 movies. Nothing that's been done since really can even come close to those 3 films. The documentary American Symphony picked up a nomination for Best Original Song. The documentary follows Jon Batiste, who is an Oscar winner for Soul a few years back, as he sees unparalleled career success with multiple Grammy nominations, while at the same time his wife is fighting a life and death battle with cancer. This film at one point was considered to be perhaps the front runner, not just to be nominated, but perhaps to win in the documentary race, but it was not not included in the Best Documentary nominees. I thought that it was a good documentary, perhaps not one of the most exceptional that I've ever seen, but it was an interesting portrait of somebody who's dealing with very high highs and very low lows at the exact same time. Every year it seems like there's a movie that's nominated in one of these categories that is the odd movie out, that definitely does not fit with all of the others. And this year it is Flamin' Hot, which picked up a Best Original Song nomination for Diane Warren. It's for the credits song. And I guess Diane Warren is just guaranteed an Oscar nomination every year from here on out. Up until it was nominated for an Oscar for Best Original Song, I didn't even think it was eligible for the Oscars because I thought Flamin' Hot was purely a streaming movie on Hulu, but I guess it was able to complete the requirements for theatrical exhibition to be nominated for an Oscar. I'm not a particular fan of the song that was nominated, and I really didn't like the movie that much. It's a pretty standard, uplifting biopic, but it really is kind of tempered by the fact that so many people have come forward and said that the story that this movie tells is absolute BS, that very little of it is true, that the guy that it's about is actually a guy with a very impressive career. He did work his way up from the bottom to become an influential marketing executive with the Frito-Lay company, but he did not invent the Flamin' Hot Cheeto, which is what this movie claims that he did, and it seems like the people that made the movie kind of knew that, but they're like, yeah, but whatever, anyway, we're gonna make this movie anyway. I don't think it's a particularly great movie or even a particularly good movie. It's fine, but the fact that it is an Oscar nominee when so many other great movies weren't even nominated this year is a bit of a Flamin' Hot Cheeto dust in the eyes to them. So this is definitely a movie that I would never have watched had it not been nominated for an Academy Award, and having watched it, I don't necessarily think I gained a whole lot from the experience other than being able to do this video. Let's move now to the movies that are nominated for Best Documentary. I mentioned that American Symphony at one point was considered to be a potential nominee, but these were the 5 that made the cut. The leading contender for the Oscar right now is 20 Days in Mariupol, which I saw over a year ago. It was submitted as part of the Sundance Film Festival. This is a harrowing watch. It documents without flinching or turning away the first weeks of the war in Ukraine. We see the people that are injured. We see the anguish on the families' faces, and I think that this is the kind of movie that's important. I think it's important to see what the realities of war are. And it is a horrific in many ways movie, but I think also an essential one. And I think it's probably why it's considered to be the front runner. While the other documentaries are interesting and do cover important subject matters, this one feels like it is almost an historical record and needed to be made. And just a note for people that might want to do this in the future, to watch all of the Oscar nominees, I would say don't save all of the documentary nominees for last. That's what I did. It's not because I didn't want to see them. It's just because I hadn't seen most of them, and it was a little tougher to find a lot of them, because watching them all in a row is a bit of a depressing experience. I'm sure that there are uplifting documentaries that are made every year. It's just that none of them were really nominated this year. Bobi Wine, The People's President, was also submitted to Sundance. It's available on Disney+. It was picked up by National Geographic, and it follows the campaign of Bobi Wine, who's a musician in Uganda, as he runs for president to depose the president who'd been there for many, many decades. And this is not a country where free and fair elections are guaranteed, so he faces a lot of stiff resistance and arrest and political persecution for running for president. I thought that this was an interesting subject matter. I don't think that it necessarily got very deep into it, but at the same time, I think it's important to note in movies like this that people don't have political freedom everywhere, and that if you do have it, you need to fight as hard as you can to keep that freedom. The Eternal Memory is a documentary from Chile, and it is about TV journalist Augusto Gongora and his wife Polino, as Augusto suffers from the late stages of Alzheimer's disease. And this is another very observational documentary. We see the moments of care and decline, the moments where he can recognize those he loves and the moments where he can't, where he understands the importance of his life's work and the moments where he doesn't understand. And this is yet another one that is a difficult watch, just because it's a hard concept to understand if you haven't gone through it or someone that you love hasn't gone through it. The idea of this loss of self. It is a powerful documentary, but a very, very sad one. And another reason why I say make sure that you are curating your lists when you're doing this, because too many of these in a row and you just have to go outside and take a walk or take a break. Four Daughters is about a family in Tunisia. We see a mother and her 2 remaining daughters tell the story of their family as her two older daughters left home to fight alongside ISIS. It's an interesting approach because we see the mother and her two daughters that are still at home or still part of the family, but the two daughters who left are replaced in this film by actors who participate in recreations of scenes from the family's life. The mother herself is also sometimes played by an actress. She takes the part of the mother in scenes that were too emotional for the real mom to actually step in. And what I liked about this documentary was it does take this interesting approach to telling its story. It's not just a matter of fact telling or fly on the wall observation, but it's a way to sort of dig deeper into the family's history. 20 Days in Mariupol, I think, is the favorite, but if you're going to give the award for innovation, then I think that Four Daughters would get that award because I've never really seen a documentary quite like this one. The final documentary is called To Kill a Tiger, and it's about a family's quest for justice after their young daughter is brutally assaulted by a group of local boys. And yeah, this is another one that deals with a tough subject matter, especially because the family is part of a very traditional village in India that doesn't want law enforcement to even be involved. They just want the family to marry the daughter off to one of the boys who assaulted her and call it a day. And so not only is the family fighting for justice in a criminal justice system where many people blame the young girl for her own assault, but they are also literally fighting for their lives in the village under threat from people who don't think that they're being loyal to the traditional way that things are being done. I was infuriated for a lot of this documentary to see how hard this family has to fight for the most basic sense of justice. And it's a movie like Bobi Wine, the People's President, that reminds you that if you live somewhere where the justice system is different and where you don't have to go through so much to find justice, although justice is still not easy in a lot of places, that you have to fight to maintain those systems because there are so many people around the world that don't have those luxuries and so many cases like this one that get swept under the rug. Our last two feature nominees are movies that picked up a couple of technical nominations. El Conde is a movie from Pablo Larraín that was released on Netflix earlier this year. It didn't make a huge splash, but it was nominated for Best Cinematography. It's sort of a what-if story about the Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet and what would have happened if instead of being an old man who was deposed and died, he was instead a vampire who was just looking for a way to rise to power once again. This is a very interesting film, a very unique perspective. Pablo Larraín is a very interesting and unique filmmaker, but the cinematography is absolutely gorgeous. It's in black and white, and it is one of the most beautiful films that I saw this year, so very deserving of recognition in this category. And then before we move on to the short films, we have Golda, which was nominated for Best Makeup and Hairstyling, starring Helen Mirren as the Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir. This movie was mired in controversy from the time that Helen Mirren's casting was announced. And putting that aside, my issues with the film are also largely on a storytelling level because there are two things that I could tell you about Golda Meir after having watched this film, which is that she was not in good health and she liked to smoke cigarettes. I don't really think that it was a very deep insight into who she was as a person. It was very one note, and it's the kind of movie that would probably only be nominated for Academy Awards in this specific category. And finally, I want to talk about all of the nominees in the Best Shorts category. Shorts TV puts them all out theatrically every year, and I actually took an entire day and watched all of them right in a row. I'd seen a few of them, a lot of them I'd never seen before. People overlook the shorts categories, but if you do Oscar pools, a lot of times these are the make or break categories that can deliver you a win. So if you're looking for some insight into what these movies are actually about, maybe this will help you out a little bit. The first animated short film is called Letter to a Pig, which is largely based around a Holocaust survivor who's telling the story of his survival to a classroom of disinterested children. This starts off as a typical flashback structure short and then goes off into a very abstract direction. The animation, I have to say, is beautiful. It combines live action and this almost pencil sketch animation style in an interesting way that I've never really seen from a short before. And really the style for me was the pull over the substance. I wasn't quite sure at the message that the short was trying to drive home, but it was a very powerful presentation of that message. And of course, the background, I thought, deserves attention. 95 Senses is framed around a man on death row recounting his life story through his different senses. Tim Blake Nelson provides the voiceover here. It didn't really have a huge impact for me, but I'll sit and listen to Tim Blake Nelson talk anytime that you ask me to. The next nominee is called Our Uniform, which is a very unique style. It's all told over fabric and a stop motion style. It's a recollection about going to a school that required a hijab and where you pledged death to America every morning, but it doesn't go too deep into that. It is very much more of a surface level type story. As is War Is Over, inspired by the music of John and Yoko, this has the backing of Weta Digital and Peter Jackson, and it's staged in the last hours of World War I as two soldiers play chess across the trenches, and then a race ensues to get the word that the war is over to the front lines. The animation here is done very well, and it may play well with the more sentimental voters, but the message really, this idea of war is over if you want it, which is the message of the song that is played in the movie, seems a bit, I don't know, out of date for me. Maybe I'm becoming a little bit cynical as I get older, but I think that there's a lot more to war being over than just really, really wanting it to be over, or the idea that like, hey, listen, if you wish that war was done, then war would be done. There's a lot more that goes into it than that. And so while I thought that it was well done on a technical side, it just fell flat to me on the message side. And finally, there is an animated short called Pachyderm. It starts off as the recollection of a young girl who spends the summer with her grandparents, but as she tells her story, you begin to understand that there is a much darker side to what is going on. And eventually, when you get to the end and you look back on the whole short, the full picture comes into focus. This, to me, is what an animated short should be, because it looks beautiful, it's a story that's well told, it's interestingly told, but it also packs a huge punch. And so for me, of the 5, this was the most effective. The first live action short nominated is one called The After, which stars David Oyelowo, and I think that his involvement in this short is probably what got it the prominence to even get nominated for an Academy Award, because he is really great in the short. He plays a grieving father who loses his wife and his daughter to a violent attack, but the short itself didn't really go anywhere for me. The only thing that it really hinged on was David Oyelowo and his performance. This is something that often happens where you get an established name involved to get the short on somebody's radar, and obviously it happened with this nomination for the Academy Award, but outside of Oyelowo's performance, it didn't really do a whole lot for me. Invincible is the story of a troubled young man who's held in a juvenile detention facility, and it sort of does that thing where you start at the end and then rewind to see how you got there. This was obviously a subject matter that meant a lot to the creatives behind the short, and it's a short that's very well made. It just didn't penetrate deep for me beyond really sympathizing with the people that were involved in the situation. Night of Fortune is a Danish short film. It is a very dark comedy about a man who's at a mortuary to view the body of his wife when he meets a stranger who asks for his help to also view the body of his wife. This has a very Scandinavian sensibility. It is pitch black humor, although I did laugh at the uncomfortability of some of these situations, but it also has a real emotional core, and I liked that. I liked that sort of thing about not worrying about appropriate or inappropriate or offending somebody. I don't think this is an offensive film, but when you're dealing with death and in any way making light of death, some people might kind of shy away from that. This movie embraces it, and I thought that it was a really, really memorable short film. Red, White, and Blue is about a waitress who struggles to put the money together in order to have an abortion and then travels across state lines with her daughter in order to have that performed. This is obviously a critique on the current political situation here in the United States. And it's another movie that's well acted and drives towards a turning point in the story that really drives home the point that's made. But I think it is a point that's made early in the film, and I don't think it does a whole lot with that point. It's nominated because it is still an effective commentary on the current and new reality for so many people in the United States, but I don't necessarily think that it's something that would be Oscar worthy, in my opinion. And finally, we have The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar from director Wes Anderson, which is pretty much just a 38-minute Wes Anderson movie. It has everything that you would expect from him. If you want Wes Anderson to win an Academy Award, this is probably the best shot that he's had or maybe will have. The short itself is basically like a storyception. It's Wes Anderson telling a story about Roald Dahl, telling a story about one of his stories that's telling a story about somebody else. And so you're going several layers deep. This really ramps up what Wes Anderson does as far as aesthetics and practical effects and all of that. And on that level, I think that this was a really impressive short film. Some people might say it's a bit of a cheat code for Wes Anderson to do this, to basically just make a shorter version of one of his movies and potentially win an Oscar. But if he does, I think it's a deserved one. Finally, we have the documentary short nominees. Many pundits have said that the frontrunner is one called The ABCs of Book Banning. And if it should win the Academy Award, quite frankly, it's a bit disappointing for me because it's about an important subject, which is the removal of books from a lot of libraries around the country. But I don't think that it really goes much farther than just telling us what the problem is. And should it win the Oscar, I feel like people are voting for it just because it's saying this is a problem. And yes, that is definitely a function of documentaries and narrative shorts and feature films. But I don't think that this documentary short really did anything special. I thought it was a bit scattered as far as what it was telling. It starts off with a certain framing device and then kind of abandons that completely. And I don't want it to come off like I don't think that the issue of book banning is something that should be given attention. It absolutely should, but I think that you also have to look at the form of these documentary shorts and not just what they're about. There's one short that hits close to home literally. It's called The Barber of Little Rock, right here in Arkansas. It's about a man who runs a barber college to try to get people high-paying good jobs, and he also runs a community lending service to try to infuse funds into largely African-American communities that are underserved by the traditional banking system. And I like really that this is a story about somebody who isn't just frustrated about the system, but is actively trying to make it better. And maybe I'm a little bit biased because of the hometown setting, but I thought that this was a very interesting look at one person who is actually making a difference in his community. The short Island in Between is about Kinmen. I didn't know that there was Taiwanese land this close to China. They blare music and announcements and loudspeakers across the bay. That's how close they are. And I hope that this isn't a film that's looked at in a different context should there be further conflict between Taiwan and China, because Kinmen Island would be one of the first places that would see that conflict. The Last Repair Shop profiles people who repair instruments for students in the Los Angeles School District. These are instruments that are provided by the school district for students to use, mainly for students that can't afford to buy their own musical instruments. And this is also about people who work very hard to make a difference, this time to kids in order to achieve their dreams, to be able to express themselves musically. And inside this repair shop, we get to know some of the individuals. I thought that this was a really, really good documentary and sort of merges all the things that are great about a good documentary or documentary short, which is that the subject matter is interesting, and then the subjects inside of that are also really interesting with their own powerful backstories and reasons why they spend their lives or have devoted their lives to doing this thing, something that is dying out at many schools around the country. And finally is the documentary short Nai Nai and Waipo, which comes from director Sean Wang, who also made a movie called Dee Dee that was at Sundance this year that I really enjoyed. The subjects of the documentary are Sean Wang's two grandmothers who live together in their old age, and they admit often on camera that they put on a show for Sean and for the camera that is much more exciting than what their actual day-to-day life is. But what I liked is that you can see how vibrant and full of life these two women are, even at their advanced age, and how much they love their grandson and want to do things with him, to have fun with him, to reflect back on their life with him. This is such a charming documentary. It's what you would call a crowd pleaser. And should this win the Academy Award, I think it sets the stage and could increase the profile for Dee Dee, which is Sean Wang's feature film, which is going to have theatrical distribution later this year. So Sean Wang having a great 2024 and could potentially be a filmmaker to watch in the next several years. And so there you have it. Those are my thoughts on every single film, feature, and short that are nominated for the Academy Awards this year. So if you haven't watched some of the movies, hopefully this will help you kind of put together your watch list for the ones to catch before the Oscars. Don't forget that this upcoming week, before the Oscars next Sunday, I will be uploading my picks right here on the channel, my personal picks for the Academy Awards, both who I think will win the Oscar and my own personal selections who I would vote for if I were an Oscar voter. So stay tuned right here for that, as well as movie news, box office reviews, all of that stuff. Thank you for sticking around while I talk about all of these Oscar movies. The awards season is one of the biggest and most exciting times of the year because you can get exposed to so many films that you didn't know about or didn't hear about if not for the awards. And really, isn't that the best function for awards, to raise the profile of films you might not have seen otherwise? I think so anyway. Thank you for spending part of your day here with me on the channel. Stay tuned for more Oscar stuff this week. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.